recorded, and reported all at the school level. This is not only required by law and administrative rule, it's also the only way our data, which is separate from like grants management, which most other programs use, that it accepts the data. So that's why it's really important that it's at the school level. So if I go back to the example of like Ascent Academies, they can't pool their funds for school land trust together and report as an LEA. The funds for this program follow the student, so there can't be any type of crossover. So when expenditures are reported to UPEFs, it's the same thing. The allocated funds for each of those campuses needs to stay with and be accounted for at that campus, and correspondingly carryovers can't be transferred between campuses to cover other carryovers, and we'll kind of go into that. So for the example I have, so Ascent Academies of Utah West Valley, they receive a different allocation of funds from School Land Trust than Ascent Academies of Utah Farmington, and although they're considered an LEA, those funds are applied for in separate plans and need to be recorded for each of those schools separately. Kind of going along with that is that funds cannot be relocated between campuses or satellites. And again, it stays with the school it's allocated within. And the last thing to note is that accounting for program funds are done at the local level and submitted to UPEFs in October, but the SLT reporting website receives the data from UPEFs for a display purpose only. And that display is for reporting and for public reporting, which is a key component of School Land Trust. So it's important to note that it's a one-way communication from UPEFs to the School Land Trust website. So if there's any changes that are done after data has been transferred from UPEFs to School Land Trust, our program doesn't actually know about it unless it's communicated to us. So that's really important with carryovers that we'll get to in just a second as well. It's just that communication with our office for any adjustments. So if you're not familiar with it already, here is a link up here, and I can share this afterwards. And picture of the login page to the School Land Trust website. This is where the schools submit the plans, plan for School Land Trust expenditures, make amendments, create final reports, and submit other requirements for participation. And it's also what creates the public reporting. And it's not a universal practice that business administrators have access or request access to this website, but because it's our system of truth, I highly encourage you to, and that can be done in two ways. You can either request access, which is a read-only access, so you don't do any entries in here, that's still just done through UPEFs. Or you can go to the public reports, which doesn't require a login, and you can access any school in the state. The downside to public reports is it doesn't have information as quickly, and comments from principals, LEA reps, or our office are not viewable, and they're usually about the funding. So it's just having that access to make sure that what you are recording in UPEFs is coming over accurately, so that you can address things like carryover. Here is a display of what a school's final report looks like. It has a description column, the planned and amended expenditures, which the principal enters when they're applying for the funds. And then it has the actual expenditures. And here's the data that comes over from UPEFs in about January. And the column that I would encourage you to get access to and just make sure that that transfer comes over correctly. And when you're looking at things like carryover, you're going to see that at the very bottom of the screen there. It'll let you know what the carryover is after all the expenditures have been accounted for. For carryover specifically, our program looks at it in two different ways. Is there positive or negative carryover, and what's allowable for each? It is the intention of the School Land Trust program to serve the student beneficiaries for the year the distribution is sent out. Our program it's not federal funding. It's not from public state funding. It's a trust that gets money from the lands in Utah. So carryover is limited in either direction to ensure that that intent is supported, that this year's students get those funds. So for a positive carryover where funds aren't depleted within the school year, there's a threshold of 10%. Up to 10% of that year's distribution, and that doesn't include counting any carryover from the prior year. It's just on an annual basis of what was distributed that year. Up to 10% can be carried over to the next year. Carryover greater than 10% is considered to be out of compliance for our program. And it's this type of carryover, so anything that is not depleted within the school year, is evaluated in an annual report. You probably have not received this report in the past couple of years because it's been paused due to COVID's impact on common program expenditures. So of course, those resulted in things like larger carryovers due to an inability to hire for planned expenditures in the category of like salaries and benefits or supplies that had delays. Starting this year, that report is going out, and every school and LEA is evaluated on the past 3 completed years, with the most recent year being 1 year behind the current school year. So right now we have up until 21-22 school year in that report. And any schools that have what's considered the non-compliant carryover of greater than 10%, are evaluated on whether it was the most recent year, the past 2 consecutive years, or 3 consecutive years. And those are subject to different tiers of corrective action, which can look like mandatory training, or even up to a reduction or loss of program funds at the discretion of the USBE deputy superintendent. So it's really important to be cognizant of watching for and helping schools mitigate their carryover to not spending program funds within that year. And I do have a best practices sheet that can help schools be proactive in mitigating that if anyone would like that. So that's for positive carryover. And then on the other hand, we have a negative carryover, which is overspending the program's funds. And this is a non-allowable practice for charter schools. And now if a school does overspend, the expectation is that funds are immediately paid back to School Land Trust from an alternate fund. And the proof of the transfer of funds or adjustment just needs to be submitted to our team to make that. Again, that's coming back to where UPEFS is a one-way system of communication. So if that adjustment is made, we won't know about it, and we'd likely be reaching out to talk about that negative carryover. And I'd recommend using the School Land Trust website that I showed you in the previous slides to do a quick check around mid-January or February is when that data is transferred over, just to ensure what our site has is accurate in comparison to what you have recorded. And that is kind of it for School Land Trust carryover. It's there's not too much to it. I can share this presentation. It does have some links to additional resources, which includes our reporting website, which I showed you on the previous slides, our page on the USBE website, and then we also have a YouTube channel with all things School Land Trust that you can access. And if you can't find questions to your, or if you can't find answers to your questions there, or you have some really unique situations, or even if you'd like a specific training created, just let us know and we're happy to help with that. I've also included our contact information. We're a massive team of 3 for the whole program. So it's myself, Paula, who's our director, and then we unfortunately just lost our training specialist, Elise, but we should have another person in as soon as we can. And then if there's any questions right now, I can try and quickly answer those, or if you want to contact me by phone or email, I'm available that way too. Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, Kara, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So thank you for all the help you've given us this year. I appreciate it and always love hearing from you. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, and with that, we will move on to Neil Stevens, and we'll hear from him again on special education.
Good morning, everybody, or actually good afternoon. We're having a great day. I'm here to talk about special education funding and carryover balances. Lisa, can you confirm that everybody can see my screen? All right, thank you. So I just want to present a brief breakdown of what our funds are like. So on the special ed side, there's two types of funds. There's federal funds, there's state funds. And this graphic breaks down the distinction in the federal side between the 611 or what we call school wage funds. The majority of the funding comes from your population and poverty amounts, which come off the October 1 count. Whereas your preschool funds, if you do receive preschool funds, they're not really preschool funds, they're funds for students aged 3 to 5. And the majority of that comes from a base calculation that's fixed at the 1997 levels. So your preschool funds are very stable, less dependent on your October 1 counts, whereas your flow-through funds, your K-12 funds, those are more dependent on your population. They can have more volatility. This year we had quite a bit of adjustment in those funds because of declines in student enrollment. So I just wanted to point that out. So let's talk about carrying forward state funds. So state funds are part of the MSP basic program, so they don't have an expiration date. However, in spite of that, we have some limitations on them. So for the biggest limitation is that you can only carry forward 20% of your budgeted funds per year. And the way that works out is that we look at the carry forward amount as reported in UPEPS. We use a combination of your APR reporting and deferred revenue. And we divide that into your total expenditures across all sources as reported on your Schedule B APR. If the resulting amount is 20% or greater, then that amount effective the end of this year will have to come back to the USBE. So you want to pay attention to your closing balances this year, or now look at how much carry forward do I have in state funds relative to my spending. If it's going to be more than 20%, you need a plan for whatever over 20% needs to come back to the USBE. We won't be making those calculations probably till this after audits are submitted and finalized. So we're looking about January of next year to make those calculations, but just know that if there's more than 20% carry forward, that amount will be coming back to the USBE to be used in other areas of the special education program. Anything prior to that, we was subject to a spend plan. And so maybe be reviewing your spend plans this now or up into the summer to make sure that you're on track to realize that. If there are, you have questions about that or concerns about that, be sure to reach out to me we can discuss those spend plans or discuss ways to be able to spend those monies and how it might impact MOE or not. But definitely something to be watching for. Carrying forward federal funds, it's pretty simple. There's a 27-month period for each grant award. You get a new award each year. You can carry forward as much as you want of that. However, if you do carry forward large amounts, it affects the risk profile. The USBE risk profile, one of the questions on there is the amount of funds in the program that are being carried forward from one year to the next. And so we want to pay attention to that. And having a higher risk profile isn't necessarily a negative thing. What it might impact is whether or not you're receiving monitoring visits in this year and the coming years. But for most LEAs, it's not detrimental to have more carry forward than not. Also have in mind that for federal funds, you have 90 days after the end of the period of availability to submit reimbursements. Past those 90 days, we're already going to close that period, and we have to ask permission from the Department of Education to reopen, to draw down funds. So generally, after 90 days, we will not allow any reimbursements to be requested for that grant period that's already been closed. So the carry forward situation in special education is fairly simple. Carry forward as much as you want, up to 20% of your state funds, federal funds, spend it within your 27 months. If you can't spend it, then it's going to come back to the USBA, which will then come back to the U.S. Department of Treasury. So not a lot there to that. Here's our contact information. Myself, Neil Stevens, Jerry Rogers, who works with Utah Grants, Corey Erickson, who primarily works with maintenance of effort. And if you have any questions, please give us, send us an email, give us a call, and we'll work through anything that you may have.
All right, if you have any questions for Neil, feel free to put them in the chat or just unmute and let us know. We'll wait a couple of seconds. All right, I don't see anything coming through, Neil.
All right, thank you.
Just want to say thank you for all your help that you've been over these last few minutes. Really appreciated it. Thanks. Lots of good information. All right, and with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right, we are going to move on to actually the CTE, which is a separate presentation. So let me get that one up. Apologize for that. All right, so as I told you earlier, Wendy Morton was from the CTE office, was kind enough to put together this presentation for us. And it's going to be, as I said, on CTE, but she also had some other programs that she included in it for us that we're going to be going over as well. And we're actually going to start with those. And those programs include the school counseling, the work-based learning, college and career awareness fund, and the college and career awareness funds. And these funds are all restricted to their individual programs. So if at the end of the year you find that you have some extra funds left over from your college and career awareness, but you find that you've gone over in your school counseling, you cannot move that money from the college and awareness over to cover any expenses of your school counseling. Those need to remain with the college and career awareness programs, even if that means that there's going to be a carryover. And I'm just going to let someone in really quick. There we go. All right, so your college and career awareness funds are for 7th grade or 8th grade if an LEA offers the CCA course in 8th grade. Your work-based learning funds are for grades K through 12, and the school counseling funds are intended for your grades 7 through 12. Any ending fund balances or carry forward that you have for these funds are still restricted to the specific program that they were intended for when they're carried over into the next fiscal year. So again, you cannot be moving those funds over anywhere else. They need to be going forward and used for those specific programs. Something to keep in mind with the work-based learning funds is that there is a requirement of matching funds, and that they match the annual award. And these matching funds are also considered restricted. And the best practice with regard to these funds is to use 30% or less of the annual award for carryover purposes. All righty. So the next slide has to do with your CTE 6000 programs, which are your state CTE funds. And these funds are restricted for the CTE programs for grades 9 through 12. Fund ending balances or carry forwards are still considered CTE restricted funds for grades 9 through 12 in the following fiscal year. And if you were with us last month, you heard from Jeff Connolly, who talked about the MOE funds with regard to CTE. And any of these MOE funds are also restricted to your 6,000 CTE programs for grades 9 through 12. And there is a board rule that requires that the MOE dollars are spent first. But what this means to you is that that spending carry forward in the next year does not increase your MOE requirements. There are some LEAs that choose to carry over funds for specific high cost expenses such as equipment in future years using their 3 to 5 year program plan. But again, as with the programs we just talked about, the best practice with regard to this is to use 30% or less of your annual award for carryover purposes. Now we'll talk about the CTE 7400 programs, which are your federal CTE funds. And these funds are restricted funds for the CTE approved programs. And in order to receive these funds, it requires an application. And this is a reimbursement grant. So obviously you have to spend the funds so that before you receive them. And the fund ending or carryover balances for these funds are not allowed. All right, if you have any questions regarding any fiscal issues with regard to the CTE funds, this slide has a list of the people that you can contact. Jeff Connolly does the monitoring, and as I said, he was the person we heard from last month. Wendy Morton is the one that prepared our presentation for us today. And then there's Libby Gills as well in grants compliance. So those are the carryover, that's the carryover information for CTE. So I'll stop sharing that and we are actually going to move on to CNP. And I believe we have somebody here from the CNP office who is going to make sure that I am going to give you the good information. And I think she might be available for questions as well. So I hope she's here. But we will move on. Whoops. Okay. All right. So CNP. Oh, sorry about that. Getting a little ahead of myself. Okay. So with regard to CNP, you are allowed to carry over a fund balance of 3 months program expenses into the new program year. And that 3 months of program expenses is calculated by, they take your AFR for the previous school year, and then they're going to find the expenditures for that program year on there and divide it by 9 months, which is the amount of time that your program is run over. And then they're going to multiply that by 3. And that's how they determine what your 3 months of program expenses for carryover is. And something to note about this 3 months of carryover is that any of the carryover needs to stay within the nonprofit school for food service account, and it should be used as startup funds for the next year. So just to make sure that that is what you are doing with those carryover funds. All right, the fund balance, if you find that at the end of the fiscal year, you actually have a fund balance of greater than 3 months of program expenses, what you're going to need to do then is you need to create a spend down plan for utilizing those funds on allowable costs within a reasonable period of time. And CNP may actually contact you to get that spend down plan from you. And this program requirement may also be covered in the CNP administrative review. And with regard to budgeting and monitoring, the LEA should actually be budgeting and monitoring the revenue and expenses for this program throughout the program year. And the best practice for this is to discuss the budget and account status with your food service director just throughout the program year, so that you know that they're monitoring it as well. And then if you need to make any adjustments to costs during the year, you can do so to make sure that you keep your ending fund balance within that 3 months of program expenses. All right, so that was all we have for first the Child and Nutrition Program. If you have any questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat and I'd be happy to answer them for you. Or like I said, I think we have a CDNP representative. So if you'd like to just unmute and ask questions, that's great too. So it looks like we're good. So we're going to move on. All right, so right now we're going to talk about the Title I Part A funds. And your Title I Part A funds, when you receive them, you actually have a 27-month period for obligating those funds, just like Neil was talking about with the special education funds. And this period of time, this 15-month period, well, this 27-month period is actually composed of two pieces. You have the 15-month period of initial availability, and that runs from July 1st of the fiscal year that the funds are appropriated for through September 30th of the following year. And then you have a 12-month carryover period after that, which would run from October 1st through September 30th of the next fiscal year. So if we think about it in terms of your appropriations for fiscal year 23, sorry, I have an issue. So we're going to move a little bit. Okay, so if you think about that in terms of your funds for the 23 fiscal year, your initial period of availability on those is going to be from July 1st of 2022 through September 30th of 2023. And then your 12-month period of carryover is going to be from October of 2023 through September 30th of 2024. Yeah, okay. So you also have a 15 limitation associated with those funds. So your funds are limited to no more than a 15% carryover of the total Title I Part A funds allocated to the LEA for that fiscal year. And there are, now if you find if you find at the end of the fiscal year that you've actually exceeded that 15%, you do have an option to request a waiver to, so that you can have more than 15% of those funds available for carryover. Waivers may only be requested once during a 3-year period, and the waiver request needs to be submitted to the state Title I director by December 1st, following that September 30th date for the initial availability. All right, so if you think about that, if you find that you want to maybe request a waiver for your fiscal year 2023 funds, if you've already requested one for either fiscal year 2021 or 2022, then you're not going to be able to request it for 2023. And if you are able to request it for 2023, then you won't be able to request a waiver to carry over more funds again until fiscal year 2026. All right. So if a waiver is not submitted, but you do have excess funds, then those excess funds are going to need to be returned for reallocation. And there actually is an exception to this carryover limitation. And that exception is that if the school has a yearly allocation of less than $50,000, they can actually carry over more than 15% without requesting a waiver. However, the reimbursement request needs to be submitted for the expenses through the 15th. Let's see, let me explain this again. And I don't think I talked about this. This was important when we talked about the 15% carryover limitation, was that the reimbursement in order to use any of your carryover funds, you actually have to make sure that you have sent in a reimbursement request for all of your expenses for that first initial availability, that 15-month period. And so you have to have requested the reimbursement for all of those funds before you can even talk about using your carryover funds. And that is actually due by October 10th, following the that 15-month period. And if you don't request that, if you don't make that reimbursement request, then you can actually, that could actually result in loss of your funding. So you want to make sure that before you send that waiver in, you have requested all of your funds that you've expended. All right, so, and that's true of the 15% carryover limitation. And then, like I said, it's true if you are an exception to that carryover limitation as well. All right, so let's move on. And I apologize, my battery was dying, so I had to go find a new one. So that's why I got a little flustered, but we're okay. All right. For the minimum school program, I just wanted to give you guys some ideas of how you can find information on carryovers for that program. If there's something specific that we haven't talked about that you're wondering about, what I usually do is I will go to the administrative rules first, and I have put down I have put a link to the administrative rules here. And what I'll do is I'll just go to them and do like a control scroll or do a control F, which is usually easier, and try and find the program that I'm looking for, and then go to that page. And again, you can scroll through it, or you can do a control find for a carryover as well. And just look and see if you can find anything in there that might give you information about carryovers for the specific program that you're looking at. Also, something I highly recommend is spring finance training. Whenever there's any new funding going on, or just even something is being extended, they always keep you updated on what new funding sources are or changes in funding sources. And they do a pretty good job of summarizing how you can use those funds and any limitations. Like, for example, I think it was last year's spring finance training, there was the school support funds, which were also known, I believe, as capital and technology funds. And they mentioned specifically in there that even though those funds were one time and they were allocated for that year, that they can be used through 2025. So that's just something that I highly recommend you do, is attend the spring finance training and take really good notes. Another thing that I recommend is that if you can't get an answer to something that you're looking for, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. If you can't get an answer to something you're looking for, then go ahead and send an email to school finance directly, and they can help you with anything that you have that you're asking about. Sometimes it takes them a little bit of time to get back to you, but they always do, and they have really good information for you. All right, so as I said, that was all we had on the carryovers, but I do have some reminders for you. And the first one is I'm going to really promote this spring finance training. For this school year, actually, this is our last meeting. We would normally have one in May, but we actually are going to cancel that one, so that and we really highly suggest that you go to the spring finance training. And that's going to be held May 12th of 2023 from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I did put a link in on the presentation, and you will be receiving a copy of the presentation in your email, as well as the link to this recording. So, and then something else I wanted to remind you of is there is a requirement in code that when a school is going to enter into a facilities contract or a financing agreement for their facilities, there is a requirement that those be submitted to the SCSB for review, and just for us to just review and give any comments on anything that we find that you may want to be aware of before you sign any contracts. And one thing that I think gets forgotten is there is a part, the agreement, there is a link for the agreement there that you can look at, but I took an excerpt out of this agreement with regard to bonds, and it says, in order to be compliant with this policy, the bond issuer shall send the bond application memorandum to the SCSB 14 days before the bonds are authorized by the bond issuer. So I just wanted to give you a reminder of that. I'm not sure that everyone's aware of it. We don't see a lot of them, so I kind of think people forget about it, but I just wanted to remind you that that's there. And with that, that is actually the end of my presentation. Sorry about the hiccup with my battery, but things happen, right? So I just want to thank you all for attending. It's been fun getting to be here and do this with you for the last few months, and I look forward to doing this again for the next school year. And if you guys have any questions, again, let me know. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes. Otherwise, thanks for your attention. I appreciate it.